Hello and good evening, parents, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Claire Howarth, Pre-16 Vice Principal, and I'm delighted to welcome Fiona Mulholland, the Head of the English Faculty, who is here this evening to lead a very apt presentation on reading to succeed. If you have any questions during this presentation that you'd like to ask, just please hold on to them until towards the end of the presentation, and Fiona can look at those, and if we've got some time, would be happy to discuss questions that you raise. The questions should be general about the presentation, and if you do have any questions regarding your child's progress, individual progress in English, then don't hesitate to contact your child's English teacher and they'll be very happy to talk to you. So Fiona, over to you, and parents, I'll see you at the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We've entitled it Read to Succeed, and it's really great to see so many people have joined us, because what that shows is that we have a shared understanding about the importance and power of reading. Now, tonight I'm going to be talking about reading specifically in the context of English rather than literacy, but I would say that the skills and the strategies and approaches that I discuss are transferable. And although I'm talking about reading in an English context, a lot of these skills can support literacy, comprehension, and deep thinking in other subject areas. So the first thing that I thought we'd discuss is, what does reading look like at West Island? I recognise some parents may be new, some parents may have Year 7 students, but we may also have some established parents. And at West Island, we have our 3 subject areas and disciplines, from MYP, going to IGCSE, and all the way up to DP English. And through all of these programs runs the common thread of the importance of reading, and reading for comprehension, reading for creativity, and really importantly, it's about reading for critical thinking. And tonight I want to share how we in the faculty encourage this through the text that we choose, through the experiences that students have, and through the skills that they develop. In all courses, a cornerstone is reading literature from other cultures and other countries. And this can be in the form of novels, such as The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind in Year 8, which is a fantastic story about a young boy from Malawi. It can be poetry from other cultures in GCSE, including Beidou, and it can be plays from South America, such as Death and the Maiden. Reading is not only about literature for us, it's also about the non-literary texts. This includes magazines, advertisements, feature articles, and through the study of these texts, we really encourage students to become conscious and critical readers, thinking about the world around them and how messages are conveyed. We also take great pains to emphasize and promote reading in both the formal way through our fantastic library resource, where students have access to a wealth of periodicals, fiction and non-fiction books, but also in more fun ways too. We love to celebrate World Book Day. As you can see, we have students who dress up, but it's also something that staff, particularly the English faculty, enjoy doing. So if we think about reading in a more specific and a more strategic way, I want to talk to you a little bit about some strategies that we use and some strategies that you may wish to use outside of the classroom to support your child's reading. So I'm just going to put something on a slide, and I'd like you to see if you can you read this? I love showing this activity to students because by and large, all of the students who read this are able to do so. And what it shows them is the conscious and amazing power that our brain has to piece together words. But importantly, it shows them the type of reading that we often do. And it's the first type of reading, which is skim reading. With skim reading, we encourage students to have a quick read when they encounter a passage that they don't know. And what we teach them to do is to identify this meaning by looking for topic sentences, by identifying those keywords in order to get a general idea and to gain a general understanding of the passage. However, with skim reading, we recognize that it's about the surface reading, and we really want to help students to reach that deeper sense, which is understanding on the top, inference, analysis, but importantly, evaluation. So what we really encourage students to do is not simply to skim for surface meaning, but to read for depth. Not necessarily to read as slow as a snail, but to read consciously and to read carefully. And some strategies and some questions that we really use with students that they should be familiar with is coming to a text with purpose. So understanding what the genre is, understanding where it was produced. It's about looking at specific words and specific details and identifying key words, not just every single piece of vocabulary, but the most important one. This leads students to those really important deep skills of making inferences, so reading between the lines and asking questions. Now, these last two are challenging reading skills because we're talking about analytical and critical understanding. And very often the question that we get from parents is, what can I do to support my child? How can I help beyond the classroom? How can I reinforce what's going on? And this, again, is a thinking strategy that students will be familiar with. And it's kind of called the golden circle. And we work from the outside in by asking what, how, and why when we encounter text that we read. And this evening, I want to give a few strategies that you may want to use or that you could try, which are fast, which are effective, and hopefully engaging as well. So one strategy that is really great for helping your child's deeper reading and analytical skills is by doing some short focused reading together. And I'd always suggest select a news article and ask your child to read it. This could be a feature article about a certain election that's going on, perhaps. It could be a match report if they enjoy football. It could be an interview with a fashion editor if that's what they're interested in. It shouldn't take any more than 5 minutes to read it. And some suggested sources, which are age appropriate, would be Doggo News, which is very student friendly for years 7 to 9. The SAMP increases in challenge. And then for those DP students, we'd encourage something more like the New York Times or the Guardian because of the depth of reporting and the language that's being used. Once they've read the article, you as a parent can use the why, or the what, how, why strategy to really hone their reading skills and to make them think more deeply. The what is testing their understanding. So can they recount what it's about? Can they give a summary? The how is asking about a specific part of the article. And I'd always encourage looking at a language, looking at a word. So for instance here, how does the word slump make you feel? The connotation of slump is kind of tiredness, apathetic, and therefore it's a negative. And finally, the why is really where we get to the bottom of that iceberg. Why use this photograph? Why use this headline? Or simply, why report on this story? And that's where we really encourage students to go beyond reading for meaning and reading for understanding and reading for purpose. These can be used in a kind of a subject-specific context for each curriculum area. And this presentation will be shared at the end, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will leave it up just for a moment. So if you're a student or a parent of an MYP student, you can see the kinds of reading and the kinds of questions that your child will be encountering. This is a text from a current Year 7 novel, The Hunger Games. It's the opening passage. And what you can see is that the what, how, why strategy encourages students not just to engage with the surface, but engages them to think about the writer's craft and how the reader feels. At GCSE, we can see that the what becomes a little bit more sophisticated because it's not simply asking about summary and meaning, it's about the theme. Again, it's asking about a wider range of literary devices, such as assonance or consonants, imagery. And the why question is a little bit more pointed. in asking why has this title been used. What I hope you can also see is that the range of text types and the types of things students are reading develops and increases in challenge as we go across our curriculums. And this leads us right up to perhaps a DP text. This is a text that students would encounter, and it's a political cartoon. And we expose students to these types of non-literary pieces because of the real-world context that it offers them. It offers them and provides them with the opportunity to apply their reading skills outside the classroom. And it's a really powerful way for students to recognize the value of the reading skills we do inside and how they have that application outside. So again, with these questions, hopefully what you're able to see is the progression and the development. And I would emphasize that for some students, they would be capable of answering a question the level above where they are. For other students, it's about being more focused. So while I'm saying MYP, IGCSE, and DP, don't be afraid to experiment and to use different questions from different contexts to support or challenge your own child. One question that often comes up when we talk about reading is, how can I help my child with vocabulary? Either that's unfamiliar or how to build vocabulary. So again, I'm just going to put a paragraph up here and give you 30 seconds to read it. Hopefully you're using your skimming skills right now, but also you're using your deep reading to identify keywords. And if you've used your deep reading skills, hopefully you've identified these 3 words, which actually don't make sense. And I've deliberately put these in here to outline a strategy that we use when students encounter vocabulary that they do not know. So when students see a word that they don't know, the tendency, or there is a desire perhaps to ignore, to bypass. And what we always want to encourage students to do is to tackle something difficult or tackle something that they don't know head on. And these are 3 strategies that can really help. If you see a word or a phrase that you don't know, context clues. So reread the sentence before or after, reread the paragraph, and that will hopefully give you an understanding of the mood, the atmosphere. It's also good to try and identify the word class. Is this a noun? Is this a verb? Is this an adjective? Possibly an adverb. And finally, do you recognize parts of the word? Is there a prefix or a suffix? Is there a part of the word that reminds you of something else that you've read? And finally, when you think you know what it's about, does your prediction fit with the rest of the passage? So let's try this with the passage. So in our first sentence, context, we need to read the first sentence again. They walked out to the beach for the first time since they had been snoddled. If we can get an overall sense of the passage that they're on a beach, but it's not positive, the idea of shipwrecked would work. So well done if you got that. In the second sentence, we notice that it's a plane, a boat, and a jutting. Plane and boat are nouns, and they describe transport. So a good guess would be that jutting would be another type of transport, perhaps helicopter. Finally, mangfully, if we look at the beginning of that word, mang, it links to the magnificent, magnitude, which is the stem for great. So it's a gratefully. Gratefully, they sank down in the sand or head in their hands. Okay. Parents often ask us, as well as understanding vocabulary, how can I help my child extend their vocabulary? And unfortunately, there isn't an easy way to do this. The best way for students to extend vocabulary is to be exposed to a range of vocabulary, to embed that vocabulary, and to use that vocabulary in an appropriate context. It can be difficult to encourage students to read very, very widely if they've got a lot of things on. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is one site that I think is very effective for students, and it's called Recommend Me a Book. It's a website which gives an anonymous passage from a book that students read, and it would probably be about 3 paragraphs long. Students click this button, students click a button at the bottom, and the title is revealed to them. Now, I think this is a great site for developing vocabulary because you're exposed to a huge range of texts that perhaps you may not necessarily pick up because they may not necessarily be your interest. So this is one really effective way to experience or be exposed to a range of vocabulary. This does lead on to one of the big questions that we're often asked as English teachers, and that is, what should my child be reading? Or how can I help my child to develop their reading skills? So I'd like you to think, which of these statements is your child most likely to say? Students come to reading with their own contexts. We recognize that all students have various levels of natural interest, but we also recognize that students have other things that can take their time. So I want to talk about the 2 types of readers that we often see. And the first one perhaps would be what we might call the reluctant readers. And that could be perhaps students who have a less than positive attitude towards reading because it's not their natural interest, because they've got a lot of other things going on, or because they find it challenging. And what I'd really emphasize is that reading should be seen as a choice, not a chore. And as where possible, autonomy, choice, and will lead to student engagement. We've found that with students who find it difficult to get into novels, we suggest shorter literary forms, almost as a gateway back into reading. And these are 2 texts that I've suggested to readers in the past that have been really, really successful. The first is The Sunshine Kid by Harry Barker, and it's a book of poetry, which normally isn't something that you'd suggest to a reluctant reader, as they might say, ugh, poetry. But Harry Baker is a young poet from the UK, and as you can see from his cover, he talks about very contemporary and current things, from rap music to gaming to junk food, and there's a real sense of humour. The other literary form that I'd recommend is graphic novels. And graphic novels have come a huge way in the last 10 years, to the point where we do teach them in the IBDP curriculum. And a great graphic novel that's available in the library is a text called American Born Chinese, which explores the duality of being a citizen or being an individual from 2 cultures. Also, anything that relates to a personal interest can really stimulate a reader and can really engage. So if you've got a child who's into football, if you've got a child who's into sport, if you've got a child who's into politics, biographies are a great way back in, because they're finding out about a person, they're finding out about a discipline or an area that is really, really exciting to them. The other type of readers that we have are those that we have to be conscious of extending. Even though someone is a good reader, that doesn't mean that there isn't room for them to develop and grow. And I think this is a really interesting statistic, and it's something that I personally recognized in myself when I was a teenager, that I had a favorite author, that I loved a specific genre. And what that meant is that I became stuck in a little bit of a rut for a while, I suppose a reading rut. So even with our good readers, it's about being conscious that we have to encourage variation in what they read. So if your child has a series that they've read and they've reread, that's fantastic, but it's about finding the next step for them. It's about finding where the next challenge is through the choices that they make. If we've got students who are reading well above their age, which we do, and it's a great thing to see, the best way for them to develop their reading is to actually develop their voice, to become articulate, to actually share their reading experiences and to talk about it. Because reading in that sense doesn't become something that is solitary, it becomes something that's part of a community. And by doing so, they demonstrate their depth of understanding, their depth of knowledge, and it really helps them to show that maturity in their engagement. Within the school, what I would really say about any kind of reading is that it's a skill. In our PE lessons, we would always say that you have to practice and you have to develop if you're going to get better. And I think that's absolutely the same for reading. Think about our reading brain as a muscle, and we need to make sure that we invest in it and we have clear expectations. Getting into good habits is really, really important. And it may be something that you'd like to talk about with your child about how and when they can read. Very often finding some quiet time at nighttime, even 15 minutes, finding a suitable space and environment, and modeling good reading habits can have a huge benefit and really, really help your child to develop those habits which are going to help them to succeed. There were a few questions. Finally, of course, there's always, if your child requires support with reading within the school, we have a fantastic team within the English faculty. Obviously, you can get in touch with me as head of faculty, but please do get in touch with your child's English teacher. We have Miss Toshi, who's our head of EAP for our students with more than one language. And we have Miss Wright, who's our head of individual needs. So we are always supporting all of our learners to ensure that they reach their full potential. With those students as well who wish to be pushed with their reading, we have some great opportunities that can go beyond the classroom. Our library catalogue is fantastic in terms of the types of books that we have that can be current, can be exciting, and can be relevant. And we have some external competitions that encourage students again to discuss books with adults, to discuss books with peers, and to really dig deep and to delve deep. There were a few questions that just came in from the webinar, and one which was a really interesting one, which I think is very pertinent, is the question, does reading need to be from a book? And I think this is such a pertinent question because we're working in an online context. And of course, we've all got a smartphone. We've all got access to our laptops. And I think it really does depend on the context. Because just to find an interesting stat from a New Zealand researcher. Reading online, what it shows is that people are reading very quickly and they can skim read very, very effectively. So that's the first type of reading that we looked at. However, what that means is that reading for depth is being impacted. So students are scanning things online, but it means that perhaps things are not going in as deeply. And I think that is to do with connectivity. If you think about yourself, if you're reading online, a message can pop up. If you're reading on your laptop, a hyperlink or a Google Meet message can interrupt your flow. So I don't think reading online or reading on screen is bad per se, but it's the distraction that can come with it. Similarly with audiobooks, I think audiobooks are fantastic for understanding meaning, so for gleaming that meaning, but it would be best when it comes to close level analysis to have the text in front of you, because it's when we're looking at text, when we're deconstructing text, that's when we come to the deeper meaning and the understanding of those implied and connotative elements. So I think does it need to be from a book? For deep reading, I would say yes. But for understanding and general and skimming and scanning, I think an electronic device is fine. But the research still is coming in. I just wanted to finish off by, I guess, emphasizing why I think this webinar is of value and why I think reading is of value. Reading isn't just about reading for understanding. It's these wider skills that it allows students to develop. When we think about the skills and when we think about what we want our students to become, when we want our children to become, empathy, appreciation, critical thinking, the ability to see things from someone else's perspective, this is what reading does. It teaches students to consider other viewpoints. it exposes them to other experiences, and it really does help them to develop a perspective and a viewpoint outside of their own. I put a few links in here, which are for reading lists. So for year 7, so year 10 for IB, and also for some online platforms which can help with reading comprehension strategies. So I appreciate that there's a lot of information in there. I've also tried my best to speak slowly, which sometimes doesn't happen because I've got an Irish accent. So I hope it was clear enough. But I would like to open up the floor if we have any questions now.
Thanks, Fiona. Just while we're waiting, just to see if we've got any questions coming in. Thank you for that. And I was listening very acutely at what you were saying as an educator and as a parent. And I thought the different approaches that you were giving to encourage our children to read were extremely valuable, because it can take great patience as a parent to find the right connection for your child to read, and it just takes that one book or that one comic or that just one thing that ignites a little spark and gives your child confidence. And I think it's building confidence in our children to develop their reading for understanding, as you say, but also for pleasure and just taking time out and slowing down. So really appreciated that. Just one question from me. As VP that oversees middle years programme, and I'm sure we've got parents here that are new to the school and new to MYP, are there any specific details you can share of what year 7 are reading at the moment, so parents can engage in those conversations?
Yeah, so we've made a conscious choice of choosing a text that we thought would excite readers for what you've just said, Claire, about engaging them. And we've gone for Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games. When we looked at this text, I went to Mr. Salmons and I said, Mr. Salmons, there is a moment in this text where we have an element of adult material because of the nature of this. There's a conflict, there's a battle. And we thought carefully. We have discussed with students and we have made them aware that if they feel sensitive, if they feel uncomfortable, that they don't need to read this part. But by and large, students have loved it because it's exciting, because it's about a young, feisty protagonist who stands up to a dystopian government. And any of our concerns about it being too mature or about it being too upsetting, the students have loved it. And I think sometimes, as you said, we come to text with our preconceived notions, and our students surprise us so much. We've balanced this very current novel with, I guess, something a little bit more traditional towards the end of the year. It's when we do a study on Shakespearean villains. I know there's a little bit of debate about, is there a value in Shakespeare? And as an English teacher, I'm always going to say yes, there is. With year 7, we look at it in a sense of 6 monologues from Shakespeare's villains. And what this does with students is it gives them confidence again with quite a challenging text. So rather than reading an entire play, students have the chance to really dig deep, really to engage with close literary analysis of a classic text. And what we found is that students have then gone off and watched the animated tales of The Merchant of Venice. They have sought out Iago and find out why he's really a true villain. So just by dipping their toe in a little bit, what we find is that's given great confidence in challenging themselves with quite difficult texts.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm not seeing any of the questions come in, and if parents do want to ask questions, they can. At the moment, Sophie, students aren't able to borrow from the library, but the ESF are looking at the guidelines for that. So thank you for that question, and a great question. As soon as we get some further information on that, we'll let you know. There is a great online resource, and I know that Fiona's been talking about online versus actual print at the moment, but there is a great database with some fantastic journals there and some novels that the children can certainly access at the moment.
And I would say I read online, I read things on my phone, so it's about what you're reading for. And I think in this context, reading online, absolutely. It's just the awareness that when you do read online, the distraction is higher. There's a higher
turning your notifications
yep.
off, isn't it? And those distractions that you can have. And another parent, Fiona, was just asking if they could have the URLs of the reading list.
Absolutely, yes. So we'll put those out. Absolutely.
Great. And I'll just check we've got seeing anything else. I think, Amy, just the things that we've been talking about, that, as you said, YouTube, Instagram at the moment may be becoming a little bit more popular and engaging for your child at this time. But again, maybe picking up on different ways to encourage and motivate them to start rereading is important. And I think children go through phases of reading as well. So Fiona, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add.
No, I think really it's about finding what he likes. If he's interested in, is it non-fiction perhaps, if that's what he's looking at the moment, find that topic, find that thing that he's really, really passionate about. Because as you said, the danger when you're online is that he's now watching videos a lot and he's kind of going into that YouTube area. So it's about helping him to take time away, even if it's 20 minutes, and just saying, okay, we're going to just take a break from this. We're going to read some print. We'll either do it together, we'll search, we'll find something together, and then you can say, and then you can go back on. So I think it's about boundaries often as well, which I know is very, very challenging because we're all online at the moment.
Yeah. And Fiona, I think that's it for questions.
Okay.
Parents, it's been a delight, even though we can't have that direct interaction with you. It's been a delight to have you with us tonight. We really appreciate it, and glad you could join us. Fiona, thank you for such an informative and useful presentation. We're going to end there. Is there anything else you want to add, Fiona, before?
No, I would say also please do use the English faculty as a resource. Encourage your students to talk to their English teachers because they're a great wealth of knowledge. They'll also know your child well, so they'll be able to think about specific recommendations. So I think that's also a fantastic resource. So do encourage them to talk to us and to communicate with us.
Okay, thank you. It's a good note to end on. Thank you, parents. We're going to turn our mics and cameras off and have a lovely evening.